All right, so we're about 2 minutes after the hour, and we'll have some additional people join as well. And this session will be recorded in case you missed the beginning of it. But my name is Matt Palmer. I am the product evangelist here at Enrollment Rx, and we're here to wish you a very happy December. I hope your holiday season is going well. And we're excited today to be talking to you about reports and dashboards for higher education. I think we have a really informative and valuable session that we can share with you today. So I definitely want to welcome all our customers and our guests here today. So I've been with Enrollment Rx about 5 years. If you have not met me personally, I know I've met many of you. I'm out here in Oregon, and I've been working with Salesforce for a while now and have a higher ed background. So reporting is near and dear to my heart. But with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Reid to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Reid Roemmich. I am one of the implementation specialists here at Enrollment Rx. I have been here since July, so I'm fairly new, but not new at all to Salesforce or higher education. I was a Salesforce administrator at Clarkson College for about 2.5 years, and we were Enrollment Rx clients at that time. So I'm very familiar with their products and functionality, and got a lot of good experience at that institution. And so I'm happy to and excited to share kind of some of the things I learned about reports and dashboards there, and that we can leverage today in this webinar.
Excellent. So Reid, if you want to go ahead and go to our agenda for today.
Sure.
So really, the focus of today's conversation is going to be kind of twofold. So Reid is going to start this conversation today around his perspective of what you need to know, or his day in the life of living as an admin in Salesforce, and the types of reports he used to see day to day, and kind of how to build some of those and set some of those up. And then we're going to kind of transition to the second half, where I'm going to start to cover a few kind of types of reports that I've seen over my 5 years that I feel are pretty valuable, as well as some just kind of best practices and tools. So whether you have been building reports for a long time or are brand new to it, this session is really kind of meant to encompass all of that. So we will have some time at the end for questions and answers. As you go through the session, if you do have a question, please use the QA box, not the chat box, so that way we can make sure we get to all of those and answer those accordingly. And again, this session will be recorded. At the end of the session, there will be a pop-up that comes up with a survey. If you could fill that out, that really helps us out, just to make sure we can continue to provide the best content for our clients. So Reid, if you want to go ahead and navigate. Since we do have a few guests with us here today, just a little bit about what Enrollment Rx is. So Enrollment Rx is an out-of-the-box solution for Salesforce, really catered towards higher education. And so we call ourselves the RAD solution because our focus is really between recruitment through decision. And so we have a number of products out of the box that can be configured and scaled to really kind of meet those needs as a higher education institution. But we're not just specific to higher ed either. I mean, we do work with some nonprofits as well who have also found benefits for our out-of-the-box solutions. But we are all native to Salesforce and the Salesforce platform. And as you kind of see here, our services scale all the way from recruitment to integration and the like. And Reid, if you want to go to the next slide. Our hierarchy here, we have our core products from core through import, events, reader, form builder, and we're built on sales, service, and experience cloud. And one of the things that I really take pride in working for Enrollment Rx almost 5 years now is we're really client-centric. So, most of our development of our products to help your institutions comes directly from the feedback from our clients. We have a fantastic product team that is really open and agile. And so, that's something I think that really kind of makes us stand out in the industry, at least. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Reid kind of kick things off and talk a little bit about reports and dashboards.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and take myself off camera here. I don't want to distract myself and see my talking head as I'm demoing. So if you see me go off camera, that's why. All right, 1 second here. So first, I want to talk kind of about leveraging reports and dashboards for system administrators. So for those of you on the call today who are in that kind of a role, I hope you pay close attention to this slide specifically. Really, you'll see kind of a common theme along all of the slides I'm going to be presenting, at least with regards to the bullet points. And really one of the first keys when you are building reports and dashboards is really understanding your audience. So as a system administrator, you yourself are kind of the audience for maybe some of the reports you might be building. So really kind of understanding what you are leveraging your skill set for, whether you're more like security focused, whether you're also part of the day-to-day admissions process, or whether you're in some other capacity. Really understanding who you're building these reports for is really important. And along the same lines, asking the right questions to do so. So whether it's gathering information from your admissions team, querying your common stakeholders, asking those right questions about the types of data that they're seeking, the types of information that they're wanting in these reports, will help kind of guide you to kind of on your path to building out the correct report or a valuable report for your stakeholders. The third bullet point is one of the most important with regards to your data, and that's choosing the correct report type. As in my early days as an admin, oftentimes I would choose a report type that may not have had all of the fields, or it wasn't necessarily on the right object. So choosing the correct report type is really invaluable with regards to getting the correct information you want to display in your reports, as it relates to the fields of information and kind of your object model and data set that you're building it off. And then the fourth bullet point here are some of the common use cases. So when I was a Salesforce admin at Clarkson College, I had a dashboard that really focused on some of these key 4 bullets that you see there. So I think a really important one for Salesforce admins is user reports. And these kind of leverage, you can see like active logins, you can see who's logging in, you can see password changes, you can see if there's somebody having an issue getting into Salesforce, if they're locked out. So we use user reports quite a bit. If you're leveraging integration services, these were an invaluable tool to me as an admin. I set 3 of them up on my dashboard that displayed if we were having issues with applications or contacts not syncing with our SIS, or if there were like potential duplicates that were being flagged between our Salesforce environment and our SIS. So the integration reports were really an invaluable tool for me as an admin. Other common ones that I used were task and event reports, and this was kind of to help drive user productivity and to kind of track on the back end if some of the admissions users that I was helping, if they were lagging in tasks or not completing events or whatnot, I could check in with them to ensure that they were understanding how to use Salesforce, if they knew how to, complete kind of the basic functionality on a day-to-day basis. So that was more on driving user productivity and general user adapting to Salesforce. And then lastly, application reports. So I built those out for a lot of different audiences, but would occasionally leverage them on my own. Specifically, one that I used were applications being assigned to myself, because as a system admin, I was not involved in the admissions funnel at all. So if I noticed any applications getting assigned to me, that was key to me that there was something wrong with the system and to have me, investigate further. So that was an example of an application report I used where I looked at applications being assigned to myself. Let me go to the demo here to kind of build out a report for you all to follow along with. I'm going to demo a user report here. This is our demo environment, but I built out a few too to give you an example of kind of some of the ones I tried to leverage at Clarkson or may be helpful for system admins. So here's kind of a portal users with password changes. Here, this gives you kind of an idea of all the active users in your environment, when they've last logged in, and even if they have logged in ever. So this would not be checked if they hadn't logged in. And then there's a duplicate records report. I didn't mention that, but I also leverage duplicate records reports, which were built through custom report types, which I think we're going to cover later in this presentation. But without further ado, let's build out a user report. So we just go to reports. And then here's where I was discussing earlier about choosing a report type. So rather than clicking on all of these, trying to dig through the various report types here on the left, I always usually just start by typing in the object that I want to build the report off. So for this, we're going to go with users. Click the report type you're seeking. And we're going to build a report on Salesforce users who have made password changes. So here within the report functionality, if you fly this little window out, you have all the fields of information. It kind of details whether they're text, checkbox, number fields by the little icon on the left. I typically always hide that because I usually just type what I'm looking for in the columns or the rows. And then you have the ability to filter here. So you can show it based off all users. In other reports we'll cover, you may be able to see like my applications or my team's applications, and we'll cover that in a little bit. But for this one, we're going to look at if their user record is true. So these are filters that are filtering the information that we will see in the report. And we're going to base it off profile name. We're just going to look at system administrators. So we're going to apply that as well. And then these are date filters. I generally don't use date filters a ton, but this can this is current fiscal quarter, it looks like. I just set this to all time, and that will show you the information. And now you can see through these filters being applied, you can start to see some of the data showing up that we're looking for. So then here in the columns, we're going to add, let's add profile name, last login, last password change, and then we'll add active. And then we're going to group these, since we're going to look at if they've failed, we're going to group them by failed login attempts. So we'll save this report. We'll call it Salesforce users with password changes. And what this report is showing us is any users who have changed their password or failed to log in, which might flag us that either something suspicious is happening or that they just need help logging in. And so we'll save that. And now we'll go back to the dashboard. A couple other things I'll point out about dashboards. For those who aren't familiar at all, these are visual representations of reports. So you can see down here where it says view report, these are the actual reports that it's being built off. And if you want to see the actual report, all you have to do is click in, and then it's going to show you the actual report that this dashboard icon is referencing. Another quick thing, you can refresh dashboards manually by just clicking the refresh button. If you hit edit here, this allows you to edit where you can add the specific dashboard components. You can also filter dashboards by various things. You can get very granular with the filters. If you click this little settings widget, you can change the name of the dashboard. You can add a description, select what folder it's in. You can also view the dashboard. So this is viewing as me. You can view it as another person where you can specify a different user, or you can have it be what's called a dynamic dashboard where you can view as the dashboard viewer. So that would be in instances where you set up a dashboard and each person logs in and they see the data that is specific to them, which is based off the dashboard viewer setting here. And then there's some other things like you can change colors or size or whatnot. We'll just leave it as is. Get out of there. And then we'll go ahead and add that component that we just built from the report. And usually they're the first ones that are built on there. So this one was Salesforce users with password changes. We'll select it. And here's where you can choose how you're going to display it. So there's various options. There's horizontal and vertical bar charts, there's funnels, there's donuts, there's numbers, metrics. So it's really, it just depends how you want to present the data. And then you can obviously change the X and Y axis occasionally to suit what you're looking, if you're doing sum of active or record count. And then there's various other settings. For the sake of time, I won't cover in depth, but we're going to just go ahead and click add. And this is where you can resize it, reposition it, make it fit what you're looking for. And so we'll add it on there. We'll save. And so here you can see 0 users. One user had 1 failed attempt, 2 users had 1, and then 1 user had 8 failed attempts. So this would give you an idea. If this person had 8 failed login attempts, you might want to check with them to see, you know, what's going on or why they can't access, or you may have to reset their password. So that is an example of just a report that I used at Clarkson to just kind of keep an eye on how things were going and how my Salesforce users were accessing Salesforce if they're having any issues. Apologies, I don't know why the screen is acting that way. Okay. So the second type of report you'll likely build as a system admin is for admissions users, or maybe your admissions users have access to build these themselves as well. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through the bulleted icons here. But again, you want to understand your audience. So if you're an admissions user, are you building this for, do you want a funnel report? Is it status tracking? Is this reporting to you know, a director level, or is it just for the frontline admissions users? And again, asking those questions: what kind of data do you want? What terms? What admissions statuses? what are you looking for certain territories to report on? Again, choosing their correct report type, and then going through some of the common use cases here. So again, at Clarkson College, we primarily for admissions use leveraged a report type called applications with applicant. And I know Matt's going to speak to that more in a bit, but in 90 to 95% of use cases for admissions reports, that applications with applicant report type is going to be generally the one you're going to want to use if you're reporting anything related to admissions numbers, applications numbers, really anything tied to the application. Other ones that we tend to use were things related to visits. That's an Events Rx tool. So for those of you that use Events Rx, we reported on visits or activity series. We also leveraged, similar to my use case earlier, for tasks and events to kind of drive productivity and see who was completing those tasks, and if anybody was lagging behind, if they needed more training or more assistance with Salesforce. And then lastly, there's a custom object called booking, which comes with Enrollment Rx as well. And we use that a lot to keep track of our events, like if we had high school visits or college visits or college fairs or whatnot, we tracked those through the bookings object. And so we would report on that too, just to kind of get an idea of where counselors were going to be, maybe like in the next month or the next 3 months, or what schools we were visiting, or college fairs, or that kind of information. So I'm going to go dive into another demo here. Close these two tabs. And we're going to build out a report on all fall 2021 applications. And you can see here, these are just kind of some sample reports that you may leverage or you may not, but to give you an idea of kind of the things that you can report on. So you can report on lead source, conversion rates. You can look here, applications by term and status. One other unique thing about dashboards I'll point out is this report here and this report here are the exact same report. They're this lead source performance report, and you can leverage dashboards to show the data in different ways. So here you can see it's a donut chart, whereas here it's a bar chart. So you can also use the same report to show things like inquiries versus started app versus submitted app, etc. So that's one tip I think some users may not know or understand, is that you can use the same report multiple times in one dashboard and use it to display different items. So we're going to go ahead and build out that report detailing. We're going to look at all fall 2021 applications. So again, we're going to go to new report. And as I said earlier, applications with applicant is going to be your best friend in most cases when you're reporting on admissions data. Again, usually one of the things I do first is go to this filters tab. And here's what I was also saying earlier, where it's showing me my applications, my teams. If you want to see all applications, you would click there. This is also based off kind of the role hierarchy in Salesforce, which I think we will discuss later. But for this use case, we'll report on all applications. And then we're going to add a few filters here to help kind of filter down our data. So we're going to report on fall 2021. And then for the outline here, where we're going to see our columns of data again, We'll leave application ID on there. We will add first name. I'll reorganize that so it goes first. And then we'll add academic level and program. And then we'll add term as well. Even though I filtered it, I still generally like to add it just so the user who may be looking at the report doesn't know it's exclusively filtered by term, unless you outwardly say that to them. And if they return to it, they just have that as a guide that it was fall 2021. And then we're going to group these by admission status. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You can see when they're grouped, it just lumps everybody under that category together. So these are all the started applicants here. These are all the people in review here, and these are all the admits. I've found that grouping by rows is usually most efficient and most presentable for users who may not have a ton of experience with Salesforce or who may just kind of be frontline users. So these reports tend to do well with kind of your admissions users. And we're going to save and run. We'll call this all fall 2021 applications. And again, you can build out folders in here. You can go crazy if you want. Go as deep of multiple levels as you want. And then we'll click save. Okay. So here this is the actual report. It shows you there's 113 inquiries for fall 2021. If you want to hide the subtotals too, you can hide those, or you can hide the detail rows or the total by just toggling these checkboxes. 85 started apps. You can see 48 submitted, 25 complete, and so on. And you can see there's 332 total records. So we'll go ahead and add this to the dashboard. Click edit. Click our plus component, and there, again, as I said earlier, it's usually at the top, the most recent report. If you built it and you are adding it immediately, it should be close to the top. So you would just click on that, select. And one of the common dashboard components in admissions, as I'm sure many of you might be aware, is the funnel chart. So we'll display this as a funnel, and it kind of gives you an idea of the admissions funnel for this specific term of fall 2021. And so we'll go ahead and add that. And it always, whenever you add a new component, it always goes to the bottom. So that's just another little tip. If you can't find it, or say you thought you added it, but you don't see it, just scroll to the bottom. So we'll add it here. And we'll save it. And there's the new component. So you can see here, you have your record count of 332. And you can see as you hover over, you can go down the funnel. And then again, as I said earlier, you can click into the view report, and that would just open up this for you to reference. And lastly, I'm going to talk about reports and dashboards for academics. So I don't know how many of you in the audience work specifically with like program directors or anybody from your academics department, but I was frequently asked by our program directors at Clarkson to, a lot of them were more basic reports in nature, but to report on their numbers at certain points in time, and often related to admission status. So again, the same bullet points, you're seeing a common theme here. Specifically, when you're working with faculty or academics, I think understanding your audience is especially key. They may not be Salesforce users. They may not understand some of the terminology. So I think they're asking the right questions in a more approachable way is definitely key. And then again, choosing the correct report type. Some of the common use cases, again, were those applications with applicant report that I've touched on and we just demoed. Also, some of the other admissions document related items, whether it was like transcripts, which would be tied to education history reports, or things like resume or essays, which would be related to the admissions documents. Or we did not actually use test scores at Clarkson, but I'm sure many of you, that would be an important reporting tool to use, is reporting on test scores. And so we'll jump into one more demo here. For this one, we are going to build out one that I was frequently tasked with creating was an admitted students report. So the faculty members had an idea of what students had been admitted and who they could maybe expect in to be seeing, like emailing with or coming through and registering for courses. So again, we'll use this applications with applicant report type. And we'll go back to filters. We'll show all applications. And we'll again use that term. So we want to just show all admitted students for fall 2021. And again, it's going to pull in a few of those common fields, but then we'll add, again, the first name field. We'll add academic level, program. We'll go ahead and remove the ID as if they're not a Salesforce user, it may not be as relevant. And we'll actually add back in one thing I forgot in the admission status was we're just going to look at admitted students. And then lastly, we'll add in term. And we'll save this, call it admitted students fall 2021. One other thing I forgot here was grouping it. So this is good practice to show you if you build a report and you think you're missing something, you can always go back and edit it and add in what you may have forgotten. So we also want to group this by admission status, just to show them these are all the admitted students. I'm going to turn off subtotals as well, since we're just grouping by one specific status. And then we will save and run. Another feature I'll point out, as some of our faculty weren't Salesforce users or didn't really get in there very often, I would often export these sometimes into Excel spreadsheets to just email them directly. So if you click this down arrow, you can also save it as, sorry, not save as, you click export, and then you can export it into a CSV, which is details only, or the formatted report, which is just your XLSX. So that's another little tip. If you're building reports for non-Salesforce users, you can always export these into an Excel spreadsheet. And you can also add a chart here too if you want a report or a chart on the report as well. And so we'll go one more step here to add it to the dashboard. Edit. There's our report. And we'll present this as a table just to show a different way of presenting things. This is good, especially if you're looking for specific data. This is what I would use table components for like my Salesforce users or admissions users who are logging into Salesforce every day, because then you can see, their names, and it's basically like the report translated into the dashboard component. So we'll add that. And then it can be kind of tricky sometimes when you move these around. We'll save. And so say your faculty members are users of Salesforce, but they may not use it as much. This provides them with a way to an easy visual if they were to log in and they're asking for who's admitted for fall 2021. Right there, you can see all the student names, and you could filter by program too if the faculty member was looking for a specific program or level. Get as granular as you want. But that is my portion here, and I'm going to hand it over to Matt now to continue the presentation, and he's going to go over report filters.
Great, thanks so much, Reid. Share my screen here. All right, so thank you, Reid. That was really insightful. We've had a number of really good questions come in through the QA as well, and we will make sure to try to address some of those at the end as well. But one of the things I just wanted to start with as we kind of transition into some additional topics related to reporting is really understanding report filters, because I would say the two most common things we hear that sometimes trip people up when building reports is, I'm not seeing the data that I need. I feel like I have all the filters correct. And the second one is often, I don't know what fields to reference, right? So, sometimes there's fields with the same name, or you're trying to just sort through some of those things. So we're going to kind of talk through a few of those related items and jump into the topic of what are called custom reports. And that's not as scary as maybe it sounds. And we're just kind of talk about the power of those and some best practices I think I've found in using that. So, really, in essence, there's going to be 5 filters related to reports. Filter 1 is going to be the report type. So applications with applicant, as Reid references, a common report. And we'll talk about that here in a second, but that report type really is your primary filter, right? You could have all the rest of the filters correct, but if that report type is the wrong report type, you're not going to get the accurate data that you need. So really understanding report types is critical, I would say, in your ability to build accurate reporting within Salesforce. Now, there's a couple of other filters here. One of the questions that came up was around role hierarchy. So the idea of having my team. If we have some time here at the end, I can show that a little bit more in depth, but the idea there is every user in Salesforce has a role and a profile. A profile controls what they can do. A role controls their hierarchy within the sharing model. So in essence, if in a role hierarchy, you're the director of admissions, and then you have 2 roles as admissions counselors underneath you directly in that hierarchy, the records that the people own underneath you would be part of quote unquote your team, right? So sometimes we focus a lot on profiles, and rightly so, but roles are very important when it comes to hierarchy and sharing of records. And so, if you haven't done a recent kind of evaluation at your org of your role hierarchy, definitely would recommend that and kind of evaluating that hierarchy, because it does impact a number of things. Other things that are filters, like we talked about, the ownership of records, timeframes, and then field level filters, which Reid kind of demonstrated. So understanding the report type. So this first level of filtering. So Salesforce out of the box has a number of report types automatically defined, because no matter if you're a higher ed institution or a B2B organization, there's just going to be what Salesforce called standard objects. A lot of which you're not going to even use. Things like price books and things like that, you probably aren't using as a higher educational institution. But out of the box, Salesforce produces those report types because it's just like a standard setting that they have. One thing that a lot of clients don't actually realize is that if you switch to classic mode, which is kind of like classic UI, you can actually uncheck any additional report types that you don't need. So one of the best practices is, as you kind of audit the report types that you need, just go in there. If you're not sure what classic is, that's the easy thing to look up. But if you switch into that, you can quickly uncheck all the unrelated report types and really make that clean, so that when somebody is creating a new report, they don't see all these examples. They see like 2 or 3 that are the most relevant to what they need to do. But a report type natively is understanding the hierarchy of your relationship between objects in Salesforce. Objects are just data tables, right, that live within Salesforce. So the contact is an object, and related to the contact are going to be in applications. And applications is a one-to-many relationship. So somebody might have applied 3 times to your university, but only have 1 contact record. So when creating this report type, the thing to understand is that you're going to have, right, somebody applied 3 times, potentially 3 rows of data, and the contact listed 3 times because they have 3 application records. And there's some ways using custom reports that we can kind of filter through that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the main takeaway we wanted to point out here is when the word with is used between 2 record types, it implies a filter natively. Okay. So as we go to here, we're going to talk about custom report types and how that is a little bit different, and how those aren't required but can be really useful in certain scenarios. And we're going to kind of talk about this idea of kind of a deluxe report. But as you can see here, let's use like our education history object as an example. If I have a custom report type of ed history and do not define any relationships, with a custom report type, I can actually go up the chain here of hierarchy, and allows me to access related fields in a custom report type to the related application, to the related contact, and I think up to 3 or 4 levels of any parent records of those items as well. So it gives you the ability to really, find your target that you want to build from, and then kind of go opposite. It's a little, I guess, counterintuitive when you first started out, but it is something that definitely will make your report building in life a lot easier, I promise. So if we look here, custom report types allow for defined relationships between objects. We talked about that. They're a great tool for simplifying your reporting. And you can call these what you want. I've seen them called deluxe report types, but typically if you have, kind of a master report per object, like a contact only report that we'll look at here, again, that allows you to not have any filters applied to that contact when you first build the report, but then you can define those relationships in the report type itself. So we're going to actually jump into a demonstration here, and I'm going to pull up the setup menu here. So in our demo org, let's talk about how you can first build a custom report type. Perhaps you've done this many times, and perhaps you've never done this. Typically, this is a little bit more of an admin function, but I'm going to kind of walk you through the steps of building one together. And so here in the quick find menu, I can go ahead and type in custom. So if I go to report types, it's not custom. Once I'm here in the setup menu, I can click this button that says new custom report type. So in this new custom report type, this is where you want to decide what object you want to target. So the example we're going to just use today is a contact record deluxe report. So I'm going to find the contact object. And it's just alphabetical here. And then you need to give it a label. So I'm going to say contact deluxe report, and I'm going to just say webinar, so I know what it is. And then you do have to describe what it is. So, used for demo. Here is the menu. So when you first create a report and a report type, the menu of where this could be stored, in these different kind of folders, if you will. So I'm just going to put it here because it is a contact report for now. And then putting this into deployment just means it's available for use. So that's no issue. I'm going to go ahead and do that here. And then it's going to take me to this next menu. So here is where you can kind of establish that hierarchy of relationship, right? Contacts with applications, and then, with education history and so forth. But again, with that report type, you're going to be querying all three objects and having multiple rows of data. This is probably the weirdest concept when creating these kind of master report types is you don't do anything. You just leave it as is, and you just hit save. Okay, so this is contact only. Now, what happens in this is you see this is your object relationship, but down here, you're going to see this edit layout button. And this is where kind of the magic happens when customizing your report types. So it's going to take you to this menu. So as you saw earlier, when Reid was building his report and you saw all the fields of information over there to the left, the types of fields they are, he could search for those. What this allows you to do is if you have extra fields, and sometimes you can hide those at a profile level as well, but especially as a system admin, if you know there's fields you're just not using on your report, you can simply remove them. You have all your contact fields here. You can just get rid of what you're not going to use and just remove it from this report type. So it really allows you to customize that. The other thing it allows you to do is you can, of course, relabel the field, but if for some reason you need to relabel the field in the report type by double clicking into it, and it popped up on my other screen here, but you're able to go ahead and display this value with a different label on your report if you want to. You don't have to do that, of course, but if you want to keep the label, the field the same, but make it more intuitive perhaps on the report that's being built, that certainly can be done for any field that you use in your custom report type. So it is a pretty handy tool. The other thing I'm just going to mention here is, so we have all contact fields. I'm going to go ahead and create a new section at the bottom. In this new section that popped up in the section name, I'm going to call my active application. So within Enrollment Rx, there's a concept of one primary or active application. So I'm going to go ahead and query the active application record. I'm just going to make a section for it that you see gets added right here. Over here is going to show you all of my fields related to contacts, but really where you can really start to scale up here, and it's kind of hidden in my opinion, is add fields related via lookup. So in this add fields via related lookup, you can see anything that the contact record looks up to, I can now pull into this report. So for example, if you're using EDA and you're populating primary business program, primary academic program, you can query any of those fields into this report directly, or any of the values on those accounts. If you have any like parents or a parent record that you want to query, high school name, so anything that has that relationship directly to the contact record can be queried. What we're going to do in our example is query the active application record. And then here you can see we can keep going, right? So academic level, keep viewing those related fields, agency. So it allows you to continue to scale to the related records to find those exact values on the report you need, instead of just relying on like formula fields all the time. So it is a really helpful kind of a tool in that way. In the example we're going to do here, we're just going to say, we can do academic program, we can do the display, and then I'm going to also do the admission status. So I'm just going to do those two for now. When I selected those two, they added it at the bottom. And the way that you know is it has these, it's like via the lookup, it has this little, magnifying glass next to it. I'm going to add these two things to the bottom of this page, and I could keep going. So the takeaway here is, if you have never built kind of an object-only report and use this kind of lookup kind of functionality and customization, I definitely would do that. One of the biggest downsides previously to custom reports is that if you create a new field on the contact, for example, it wouldn't natively get added to custom reports. That was one of the big downsides to them. But I think 2 releases ago, if you've noticed, if you create a new field as an admin, there's actually a checkbox now that says add to custom report. So if you have a contact report and you create a contact field, it will add that to your custom report. So it kind of alleviate that kind of burden a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and hit save here. And now I have my Contact Deluxe report. So in our demonstration here, we had a scenario, and I'm just going to read that scenario out loud here real quick. And that scenario is the president of the university wants to know how many total contacts are in Salesforce and what the biggest contributing lead source is. So using this Contact Deluxe report, this would be a really good solution for this. Now, if the request was how many applications, that'd be a little bit different. How many total applications or how many total admits. But here they just want to know the total number of contacts, irregardless of kind of the application, and what is the primary lead source. So let's talk a little bit now that we've built this Deluxe report type, how we could build that type of report using this. So if I go ahead and go to our tab here, I can go to the Reports tab. And something just to note here is this is going to always look different for everyone because this is just what you've recently viewed, right? This is just standard Salesforce. The other thing, we didn't go deep on, but just a note is that, folder sharing within reports are also like a hierarchy based. So, you can have certain reports be more private that only certain users can access. And all of those things are controlled through the folders that they exist in and the folder sharing permission. So I'm not going to take a deep dive on that today, but if you see these folders, that's just something to take note of, if you were doing this on your organization. So if I go now and create this new report, it's going to give us this pop-up screen. And this is, remember, when we created the custom report where we're able to actually say, categorize this. We call this the Contact Deluxe Report Webinar. I'm going to go ahead and continue, but now this is my report type, right? So the fields of information that we see here, right? We have the contact fields, but we have these 2 active application fields that we had added to our report type as well. So by the way, if you ever go back in and then want to add more fields or customize the custom report you've added, once I would go back into this report type, I would see those additional options as well. But go ahead and go into the filters here. So one of the things that Reid referenced is when this first gets set up here, when you're building a report, I'm going to go ahead and say all contacts and apply. And then it just defaults to alphabetically to the to the first date field on the object. That's why it picks this. It's just whatever's first alphabetically. And so you can just move whatever that field is just to all time and just remove that filter, right? So now we see the records actually display accordingly. So the request was to see the total number of records, contacts that we have in the system in lead source. So in this filter, we just want to make sure that lead source is not null. So I'm going to go ahead and say lead source is not equal to, and then it's just blank here. And then in my outline, I'm going to group this by lead source. Now, just a note here, if you're new to Salesforce reporting, if you don't have a grouping, you can't create a chart, right? There's no way to kind of group this data together. So here you can see that we have this grouping here. And another thing that sometimes throws people off is this isn't everything. This is just a preview. So if you're like, oh, only 17, that's not the final result. You always want to run it to actually see what the final result is. This just gives you kind of a baseline of what that is. So in this example here, I'm going to go ahead and add the chart here. And in this chart, I'm going to go ahead and just make this a donut chart for right now. I'm going to go ahead and just click out of it, and I'm going to save and run. I'm just going to say, and again, if I save this in my private reports, nobody else will be able to see it. Like if I was wanting to share this with the admissions team, so you want to make sure that you selected a folder where they could view this. But I'm going to go ahead and hit save here. And it's going to show me the total number of records and then grouped by, the records according to their lead source. Now, what's nice about this, and what I like to do with these types of reports, is I like to remove the detail rows. So it gives me the total record count. But you notice in the summary record count, it's just doing it alphabetically, essentially. So one thing that sometimes people miss is in this little drop down, I can sort by record count. And now if I go descending, I can see that my primary, lead source, that I could report back to the president is from stealth applicants, people that have not yet inquired, but the first time they created an account was through the applicant portal and so forth. So that's an example of how you'll be able to build a, using a custom report type like we just talked about, build an example report quickly and show that information efficiently. There was a question that popped up just while I'm here about sending emails, in Lightning. Can you subscribe somebody to the report? And the answer is yes. So in this drop down here, there's a subscribe button. And then here in subscribe, so if you wanted this report to go to, a user at a certain time, daily, weekly, and that sort of thing, you'll be able to go ahead and do that. So the reason why you see no recipients option here is because I saved it in my private folder. But if it was in a public folder or a shared folder, I'd be able to select users where I could email that to. The same concept goes for dashboards, by the way. So that's a little bit about custom report types. There's a lot that you can definitely do with it. And I definitely would recommend kind of, even after this webinar, if you've never built one, kind of take a stab at one of those and see if you can, build a few reports that way that might be effective for your business needs. All right, I'm going to go ahead and continue to share my deck here. So this is the scenario that we just walked through. We're going to now talk a little bit about year-to-date pacing reports. So year-to-date pacing reports allows you to say, okay, well, how am I doing in this category versus the same time last year? And there's a number of ways you can kind of approach this, but we're going to share one possible way that you might be able to leverage this. Now, the one thing I just wanted to make clear here is that the prerequisite for this type of report that we're going to review today is that your date stamps, which we set up kind of standard as part of our projects, are populating accurately. So in other words, we typically through automation have date stamp fields related to statuses as a record moves through those statuses. So submitted app to completed app and the date that happens. If you are at an organization that doesn't do that, then this isn't going to work. So that's just the prerequisite for this, which we definitely recommend overall as well. And this is something where you can add additional filters as needed. So I'm going to kind of jump in to a demo here in a minute, but this is kind of how this works. So the great thing about Salesforce reporting is date-related fields support this idea of what they call relative term values, right? So essentially, are relative date values, where you can pick an actual date range, or you can use this kind of dynamic criteria of things like days ago, this week, last week, today. Any of those kind of relative terms Salesforce reporting and list views for that matter will recognize. And so as we are looking at this example report, we're wanting to compare those date admits for fall 2021, essentially 365 days ago. So 1 year ago and anything before that. compared to kind of the last 365 days in fall 2022. So it's a pacing report. Essentially, it says, all right, at this time, this date last year, how are we doing for the fall term versus this date this year? That's the goal of this report. It's not a summary report of all applications you've had during that time. It's a summary report of a pacing report. So, that concept maybe is a little bit different, but I think it is a valuable type of report that can be built. And we're going to kind of walk through an example together. So this here can give you kind of that visual, right, of year submitted apps for domestic, right? So fall 2021, this date this year, using that criteria, we were at 87. In fall 2022, we're only at 20. So, we are actually a little bit behind. And now there are going to be various reasons for that. Perhaps, a lot of the records hadn't been admitted yet on a certain date, and that was coming up. But this is kind of gives you an idea of kind of a visual that this type of report can build. So here's the scenario. So the director of admissions wants to know for how admissions is pacing on admitted students for fall 2022 versus the same time last year for fall 2021. So as a Salesforce admin, what steps would you take to fill this request? So let's go ahead and jump back into our demo environment. We're going to go, I built this report already, but just for this sake of walking you through, I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to go ahead and click new report. And then for this report, because I am wanting to see applications specifically and their related contacts, I'm going to use the report Reid reference, which is applications with applicant. So as I build this report, here in my filters, again, as a reminder, I'm going to switch this to all applications. And then I'm going to add a couple of pieces of criteria in my filter. So the first piece of criteria is I want that the term to equal fall 2021. And then here, as I add an additional filter, I'm going to say date admit. And when I go into date admit, you can see it gives me an option. It says date, or you see this little tab right here. It says use relative date. This is where you would click use relative date. You notice that the pop-up changes essentially. And I would, in this, write 365 days ago. Now, it might be a little confusing to say, what's the difference between the last 365 days and 365 days ago? The difference is that, let me go ahead and say less or equal to, is that, what is it, 12/8/2021. So essentially what it's looking at is 12/7/2021 and anything before it. If I said last, it would be anything in between today's date and a year ago, right? So it's a little bit of, kind of just thinking through what those concepts mean, but that's why there's a difference between saying days ago and last when it comes to days. So I go ahead and hit apply here. Now, if I don't care how old this data goes back, right? So, anything before a year ago for fall 2021, then I could just leave it as is. And the example that we gave, it was essentially kind of, putting a filter or baseline on that, saying, but not more than 2 years ago, as far as a date admit would be concerned. But for the sake of this example, I'm just going to leave this as is. And then I'm just going to add term again. So I'm going to say term. Then I'm going to say fall 2022. I'm going to hit apply. You notice it goes away, and I'll explain why here in a second. And then I'm going to say date admit. And then here in relative date again, I'm going to say last 365 days. I'm going to hit apply. Now, nothing's going to populate. And the reason why is because these right now are all and statements. So in order to add filter logic, what you do is you go to this little drop down here and you add filter logic. And in our case, we're looking for 1 and 2 or 3 and 4. So you put the brackets here. I'm just using the tab key. You can type in the or value, again, the brackets. So if you're building a report, haven't built a report in Salesforce before, and you need to add conditional logic, that's how you do it. I would now apply this logic. Some records populated. Now I'm going to group this by term. I'm going to add a chart. And I'm going to just run it for now, just to see how we do. So as you can see here, for fall 2022, we had 2 records that were on pace to admit, versus fall 2021, we were at 10. Obviously, this is a small amount of data in our demo org, but that's kind of the general idea. The other thing you can do here is in your row columns, add the actual date field where you can compare against that. So year-over-year pacing reports can be done. This example here is just this year versus last year, but you can continue to kind of expand that out for multiple years using that logic. And again, this deck and like the criteria that we use will be available after the recording. So, certainly if you have questions, let us know. But we definitely wanted to highlight that as a nice feature. So the last kind of topic before we get to Q&A that I had is talking about conversion. So I talked a little bit earlier about how we can measure admission status through date stamps using our automation. But another part of our standard practice is we'll essentially have a formula field that is almost like a binary value of 1 or a 0 if that date stamp has been populated, right? So if somebody has raised their hand and they become what most commonly we call an inquiry, right? And that inquiry admission status is populated, the date of that status, as well as whether or not that's populated in a 1, will essentially be populated. So everybody who goes from inquiry to start app to submitted app, using this field, this formula field allows you to start to measure conversion percentage, because using number values in Salesforce, you're able to do that. So this is I would say for almost every project that I've worked on, a very common one that we set up for clients to kind of see really how you're performing as far as converting students through your funnel. Obviously, you want to make sure you're getting good ROI and trying to see, by program, by term, by demographic, by, campaign or marketing, how you are capturing the best conversion, right, through your process. So let's talk about one last scenario here. The COO of the university wants to know for fall 2021, what conversion percentage was what it was for those who inquired to those who actually started an application. So basically they just want to know, all right, out of all the inquiries we had for fall 2021, what percentage of them actually moved on and started an application? So the question becomes, all right, well, as a system admin, how would I build this report or fulfill this request? So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go to reports and I'm going to create a new report. Again, this is going to be the applications. With applicant. All right, so what we're wanting to see here is all applications. And really what we're looking to measure are a couple of things. So for the request was for term being fall 2021. And the other thing I'm going to do here is say date inquiry is not blank, right? Because we don't want to bring any of those into this report. They shouldn't be anyways, but just to have that. All right, so data inquiry is not blank. Now in our outline year, those formula fields that we were just talking about actually typically just have the name of the admission status. So I'm going to go ahead in this column and search for inquiry. You notice here it says inquiry. And you'll notice it's a number field because of this little symbol next to it. And I'm going to do the same for started app. All right. So I have my 2 columns of inquiry and started app. I have everybody who has at least inquired in fall 2021. That's what we have so far. Now the question becomes, all right, well, how do I actually measure conversion? Well, this is where a little kind of maybe hidden thing that you may have not used called row summary formula can come in really handy. So before I do this, I am going to group, you have to group it by one thing. So I'm going to group this by term in order for this to populate. And I'm going to go ahead and go over to fields here. And you see here, there's now something called summary formulas. Okay. So what this allows you to do is, without having to build an actual, formula field in Salesforce itself, you can just build a formula field specific on the report. So I'm going to go ahead and say create formula. Sometimes this takes a minute to populate. Here's where you can find the fields that you're looking for and you want to insert. So I'm going to say inquiry to started app. One thing just to note here is you can change the output type. So we're actually going to look for a percent in our example. And I'm going to go ahead and say started app, our number. And the way you do this is when you click this, you can also change, the sum or average or et cetera. But for right now, we just want the sum. You click insert. Okay. So this populated the field, the full API name. Now I'm going to divide this by the inquiry number. I'm going to go ahead and enter inquiry. So now I have this formula, and I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. So now what you'll notice is that we have inquiry to started app right here as a formula summary column, and it added it right here. Now, right now, it looks like it's 100%, but again, we have not actually run this report yet. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run. And you can see, and especially if I remove the detail of the rows, this gives you a pretty good summary. So for fall 2021, we're at about 65% of people who have actually came in the system and raised their hand have actually started an application with us. So that gives us a benchmark, right, to see kind of where we're at. But perhaps, they took it one step further and they said, okay, well, that's good to know, but how does that compare to like what we did last year? Perhaps, what was our, comparison to last year? And the way that you could do that is if you go back to the edit here, we could actually add just one additional piece of criteria, which is the term equals fall of 2020, right? I hit apply. Now it's going to go away again, remember, because I haven't added the conditional logic. So in this logic, I would say, let's see, 1 and 2 or 3. So it would be, essentially, you would basically switch this up. So it would have the or statement in there, or I could reorder this. But, if I went ahead and did that, I could go ahead and add that criteria, and then it would render and show me that more comprehensively. So one of the things that I can show you here in our reports that we have more built out, I'm going to discard this change, is in our conversion rates from inquiry fall. I think it was this one here. You can see here, because that conditional logic, we could compare 19 to 20 to 21. You would just add that in the or statements there. And you can see kind of how you are performing across all kind of metrics in the average of those. So it's a really helpful thing in order to measure those conversions. The other thing I just mentioned is that we did that for inquiry to started app, but you can actually do that for each kind of progression. So if you wanted to do inquiry to submitted app, inquiry to complete, to review, and so forth, it allows you to really measure the conversions across kind of all those different elements. So conversion reports are a big one, I would say. The other thing, I'm not going to demo today, but I would say is pretty helpful, in my opinion, is, as we mentioned, the distance between the date stamps, right? So, there's date A and date B. whether it be a formula field in a report or a formula field you build on the object, you can actually just do a simple formula to average the number of days it takes somebody to go from submitted to admitted, or maybe admitted to registered. And so for some of the clients that I've worked with on dashboards, they have this rolling kind of average to say, the importance of going from, submitted to admit. They have like kind of metrics that they measure to say, we want the average for this term to be this many days. And so using reporting, you can also do things like that. So kind of going back to our deck here, we have about 10 minutes left, and we wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions and answers. So, before we get there, and I'll let Reid chime in as well, but we just wanted to mention a few best practices. So the first one really is to understand your data in your fields. If you haven't created some sort of like inventory of all the fields that you have, definitely would recommend doing that. Understanding what the primary fields you are and aren't using should be just a good standard best practice. There's actually something, you can use custom report types to relabel like we mentioned, but there's actually something called translation workbench as well in Salesforce, where you can relabel custom fields, especially managed package ones if you have a number managed package. So it like do not use or something like that. So it's less confusing because you can certainly hide those fields from certain profiles, but for system admins, it sometimes can be a little confusing. So definitely making sure what data you're referencing is clear is really important. Reid mentioned this earlier, but building a baseline report that you can scale and copy. So once you have that baseline report that you like let's say it's all new applications the last 30 days, or all submitted apps the last 30 days. Once you have that baseline report and the columns of information that you want, you can save as like a Word document and basically just change one input. So last 90 days, last 120 days, or whatever it might be. But once you kind of get those first few kind of baseline reports set up with the information that you're looking for, it is really helpful and easy, I would say, in Salesforce to really scale those up. Use the dashboards to simplify your data and leverage dashboard filters. So Reid, I think, did a good job of kind of reviewing those and kind of how those can be leveraged. By the way, dashboards can also live on your homepage of like your when you first sign into Salesforce. So if you had a certain like what's called application set up for like the Dean of Admissions, of course you could maybe have them email to dashboard, but also if they were a Salesforce user, you could just have like their own kind of setup where they just log in and the only thing they see when they log in is the dashboard that they need to see. So dashboards can be used in a variety of ways. Relative values we just went over. So the use of, kind of the relative values of, days ago, this many days, fiscal year. And there's a really good help article that we'll link in this deck. You can just Google relative values, Salesforce as well, but it really explains what each one is. Because, for example, if you use the word this week is different than the last 7 days because it's when it actually calculates the beginning and end, so it can impact your data. And then finally, just understanding your role hierarchy. So I think we talked about this a little bit, but roles are really important in trying to get reporting for your team, as well as sharing around, security around report folders and so forth. Reid, is there anything else you want to kind of add to this?
Not really. I guess a few other things would just be ensure you refresh your dashboards if you're using them. If you don't refresh them, it can show really old data. And then just be sure if you're not using a report anymore, or you're sure you won't be using it, it's best to just delete it as opposed to keeping it around and clogging up just kind of the organization. So those are a few others I was thinking of.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's very good. All right, so we kind of came to the question and answer portion of our section. So we do have a few minutes before the end of the hour. Reid, I don't know if there's any new ones that kind of came in. I know there's one or two that maybe I can speak to as well, but have there been any new ones that you want to kind of highlight that have popped up?
It looks like they've all been answered through the chat, but we can go through them, some of the newer ones that came through.
Great. Yeah, so let me just kind of go, I have this pulled up here and kind of
okay.
start the beginning, because we do have a few minutes. So somebody asked the question, Amanda did, if they have multiple applications for the same semester and program and students frequently submit that, what's the easiest way to use the report type applications with applicant without reporting those dupes as unique to in the funnel? So I think, I don't know if that answers your question 100%, but what I essentially said is that might be a good use case where I showed that custom report type of the contact report, because there you can only reference the active application, and that might be something where you're just looking at only the active application and not all applications. So that automatically kind of adds that filter. So that might be a good solution if you have that available to you. And Reid, feel free to chime in on any of these if you have any other thoughts.
Sure.
My team's applications use, so with the role hierarchy, if I have a minute here, I might be able to show that, Debbie. I know you had some good questions. Somebody asked a question, Jessica did, on parent relationships in that. So that depends on your object model. So if you're using EDA and using the relationship object or MPSP, that actually establishes, EDA, sorry, is the higher education architecture. That's the baseline for Salesforce and higher ed. They have an object called relationships that establishes relationships between two contacts. So you could use a relationship report. But if you were using a custom object, whether it be a custom report type, let's say it was like a family object, I would build a custom object at the family level in that example, and then reference the contact. And then I think you could pull that information into the report you're looking for. Debbie asked if we can schedule reports in Lightning. So I did cover that. Can you go over how to pull a report for conversion rates? I think we hopefully demoed that the way that was needed. Can you send automated reports to faculty, example, monthly admitted students in their program? Reid, I think you can speak to this. I know if they're users of Salesforce, you can just do it through the subscribe feature and send it to certain users. But if they're not users in Salesforce, I don't know that there's a way to automate that, but maybe you can speak to
Yeah. I did have a little, we used Outlook. I did have a hack in Outlook email to like set up a rule where if it was sent to me, then it would automatically route to them. But again, you can only subscribe up to, I believe it's 5 reports or dashboards. So if you hit that limit, then you're kind of out of luck.
Great. And I think the last kind of 2 questions I think have been addressed. I want to make sure we have enough time, just our last Q&A. I know Matt had a question that Mark addressed, as well as I think Chris as well, but those are probably a little bit more lengthy topics for the time that we have. So hopefully those got answered the way that you're needed, and we can go from there. So as we kind of wrap things up, and please hang on till the end here. I know we're almost done.
Quick, Matt, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Matt did have another question. It looks like it just came in about the limitation of reports that you can subscribe to. I believe it's hard coded at 5. So I don't know if I don't think there's a way around that, but I can do a little more searching, but I have not seen anything that could be increased.
That's a good example of maybe a dashboard, right? Where you can pull multiple reports in. Might be a better solution in that scenario. Okay, so as far as conclusions, we just wanted to thank everybody for the time today. As a reminder, if you are a client with us, this recording will be posted on the Rad Navigator site, where we have our, product release notes, our user manuals, and video libraries, and our webinars in the past as well. And we just want to say thank you. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us at support@enrollmentrx.com. And please hang on. As soon as we end this webinar, there will be a survey that pops up. If you can fill that out for us, it just really, really helps us make sure that we're continuing to provide the best content for you all. So we appreciate you carving out some time in this holiday season, and we look forward to talking to you soon.